Welcome back, everybody, to Along the Road. We're here in Kingston, New Hampshire, and I'm Pastor Josh.
And I'm Katie Johnson, the Children's Discipleship Director.
And as you know, every week we get together, we talk about our faith, we talk about how that intersects with life, and what we've been doing the last 8 weeks or so is we've been going over a book, and that book is one that we use in our church to kind of encourage everyone to read along. And it's one called The Political Gospel by Patrick Schriener, which has less to do with Republicans and Democrats and more to do with our lives and what politics is. And so we encourage you to interact with it, to know, to understand things like what a politic is. It's just a governing and organization of life, and how he claims that how we are as a church, claiming Christ as King, is a political statement. And that's something that you got to chew on for a little bit. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we're not part of our local governments and part of our American government, but we recognize that government is underneath God's reign. And so we serve Christ first, and then we do submit to the government. So he's talked about submitting, but also subverting, and the tension we have in that. So last week we were talking the practicalities of the way of the lion and how things work out, but this week he balances that with the way of the lamb and what we're supposed to do. So if you're following along, we are in chapter 8 of this book. It's called Conquering by Martyrdom, this chapter, or the way of the lamb. And he says every generation, this is how he starts the chapter, faces a political choice. We follow the cross in our political engagement or our own ideas. This is a choice we have to make.
And sometimes not just once, but multiple times.
Yeah. Will we let fear drive our decisions or trust God? And I think of that especially recently with a lot of people making political choices about presidents. Some of their decisions are based on a fear of, well, if this president doesn't get in, then I might get these Supreme Court justices, or I might not get these, and my whole country will fall apart. I've heard those words. There's this fear instead of trusting God and doing your work. He says, will we submit to his way, that's God's way, or carve out our own path? And then he says Jesus faces the same temptations. So it's interesting that he points out the temptation of Christ, which is when Satan, after his 40 days in the wilderness, Satan tempts him, is in his aspect, a political temptation. You know, who are you going to follow? Who are you going to trust? The competing views of the kingdom. You know, Christ is the coming king, but Satan's offering him kingship now. And that's part of it. He was tempted with political power to control all the lands, to have it all. On page 166, it says, similarly, we're tempted that way, to trade our inheritance for an idol, to trade who we are. If we were just worship this thing or trust this other thing, it would matter. It says, the second thing is Jesus was tempted to privatize his faith. So Satan enticed him to take and eat bread and serve himself, to take care of himself. All he had to do was look at a stone and transform it into bread. That's all you have to do. And he would satisfy his own hunger. So do what you need to do to satisfy your own longings. Your own needs. And so he said, in the same way, we become focused on our own needs. And I see that, I'm sure our generations are new to this, but I see that a lot in these generations. Focused on our needs. What is our need? And from left or right, you know. Someone's need to identify however they want, or someone's need to say, no, I don't want you to identify how you want. And what are our needs? One person wants a secure border, and another person wants everybody to come in. And they are so focused on their needs and what they can do to make those reality.
And their perceptions of what is right and wrong.
Yeah. And what we forget, what he put here, the next sentence is great. He says, what we forget is that we are placed here, if we're believers, not to get our needs met. We're placed here to serve. And that changes the perspective on that as to which is a high priority. If you're a borders person and you say, I want secure borders, there's nothing wrong with wanting that, but you're here to serve. How do you serve that is above that? What is your service that is higher than that? And finally, he says, Jesus is tempted to spiritualize the kingdom. He was told to go to the temple and throw himself off and that angels would protect him. He could escape it all through spiritual, supernatural deliverance. But he keeps his eyes focused, Jesus does, on the road to Jerusalem. So the temptation for us is the same, to try and escape all of this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that we need to view Christianity as not about temporal things, but about eternal things. So we want to escape this, and then we'll say politics aren't important. It doesn't really matter. You know, God's kingdom wins, so who cares what happens here? And so Jesus, as he said there's another way, but it's the way of the cross. It is a way of death. It is a difficult way. And so he points out in 167, the question is not whether we must fight the lion's war, because there's battle, there's spiritual battles, there's battles to be fought, but how should we do that?
Mm.
And I've seen in my generation, in my 40-some years in life, the American Christian conservative groups have come out and they've fought wars, and they do it very vocally, and sometimes I would say very non-Christian-like, very angrily, aggressively, and they claim this whole right that we are for our freedom in our nation, which we have. But instead of having freedom in our nation for anybody to worship how they choose, which may not be God, they really are saying, well, we're a godly nation and we're supposed to do this. And there is no such thing as an actual godly nation. I think it's a personal opinion. That's not from the book. But I don't think there is. You know, a godly nation is the gathered body of believers, and they are not bound by ethnicities and geography, and that's the godly nation.
Or politics.
Or politics. You know, they're bound by something different. And so he says that as we await the coming king, the shape of what we do should be the shape of the cross. You know, it is our call. That is our purpose. That is our why. Why do we fight? Why do we do these things? And then the how. So he says, on the cross we meet the bloodied, mangled lamb. And I think he brings it up later, but it reminded me in the sermons we've been doing recently, when the seals are placed out on the scroll and they say who is worthy, and they talk about the lion, the Lion of Judah, you know, the seed of Jesse, this worthy one. But when you see the one coming who is worthy, that's claimed this way, this powerful lion, it is a slain lamb. Mm-hmm. It is a mangled body of a lamb. It is not the lion. Well, it is a lion, but his form is in a humility type of form.
Right, which just is so opposite to the way we think of power.
Yes. That's why he says we're called to conquer, but the way that we're called to do that shocks us.
Yes.
He actually says the slain lamb becomes the paradigm of our conquest, martyrdom. We win by martyrdom.
By apparently losing.
Which is exactly what Christ did. The lamb's army must trace the lamb's footsteps, and it is kind of shocking that we would do that. So Patrick lays out 3 ways in which this is done. The one is that we conquer by witness. Mm-hmm. And so he lays out the idea of the famous brand Nike. And I thought that was interesting. Nike wasn't first called Nike, but it was originally called the Blue Ribbon Sports Company. I actually didn't know that.
You didn't?
I didn't know that. I know. I'm supposed to know everything. I thought it was interesting, but the idea of where it comes from and how it takes over is basically what happens today. Why things become popular is witness. Now we call them social media influencers.
Right. Exactly.
Well, you know, I was talking about it.
It's the same idea.
It's the same idea. I was talking about it. Like, I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere around there, you know, Crocs came out. I remember wearing Crocs, and I thought they were ugly, they were dumb, but they were really comfy, so why not? You know? And we wore them on mission trips, we wore them in different stuff, and then they went away. Recently, Crocs have come back, and they've come back in style. Like, there are Croc boots, there's Croc Western boots, there's all types of Crocs out there. It's really crazy how they've come back. And a lot of that is due to a marketing guy who said, we can bring this company back up to where it belongs, but we're going to use social media influencers. We're going to give them away, we're going to do this, and have people witness about them, share about them on their little platforms. Mm-hmm. And now you see where they are. And if I'm not mistaken, that same marketing person left Crocs, and he went to a company called Stanley. And I don't know if you know now, I think it's coming, my guess is coming near the end, the big Stanley mugs that everyone's carrying around. Mine's not a Stanley, mine's an old school Yeti, you know. But but they're massive and they're big, and now on social media you see people making fun of them. They're carrying buckets around with a straw. But all of this is the old Stanley company that was in obscurity at this point. They brought out this new product, which is really just a bigger mug. Yes, it works. It's fine, but it's massive. And the witness of it made everybody want one.
Makes a statement.
So the question remains, as he says, how do we conquer in this way? As we combine the cross and conquering it, it's a lot about witnessing.
It is, and it's really interesting because the theme for the month of March at our church is going to be humility.
Yes.
And humility is a very foreign concept.
It is.
In our society. But we can witness through being humble because it causes people to stop and say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You are not acting like everyone else.
Right.
What's up with you? And it becomes a witness.
It does. Our actions, our words, they become a witness. And so he calls us out in the Lamb's victory. This is what it is. This is what Revelation shows us. But he says, what does it mean to be victorious? In the book of Revelation, by implication, it means to be victorious. And by implication, what does that mean today? So we see that there. What does it mean today? And he says, according to John, victory has already been obtained. So the Lamb has already done this. He is worthy. He has opened the seals. He has done this. So we follow Christ in this victory, not by raising a worldly army, not by picketing every place that we can, not by doing all that, but by witnessing the reign of Christ. By claiming this is what we know. This is what is good. We follow a politic of persuasion all the way down to the most revealing text defining for the victory, and that's in Revelation chapter 12. God's people conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So the conquering is the blood of the Lamb and then the speaking, the witnessing of their testimony. For they did not love their lives to the point of death. It is that important to me to speak Christ and what he has done. And I know people that speak politics, American politics, for left or for right, for open borders, for closed borders, for pro-life or pro-choice, and they're very vociferous about this. And they say they're believers, both sides, but if you ask them to speak Christ, they're very quiet. And so you're not witnessing at that point, you're just showing what your idol is. Mm-hmm. If you have a passion about those, and there are people out there, and you're allowed to have a passion about those.
Right, that's not the point.
That's not the point. The point is, if that passion is louder than your passion for Christ, something's not right.
Then you're out of balance.
You're witnessing the wrong thing. It's very important. So John provides a wealth of political discipleship on this verse. He identifies the true enemy and two pillars. So God's people conquer him. That's a true enemy. That's Satan. By one, the pillar of the blood of the Lamb, and by two, the word of the testimony. And why did they do this? They have a motivation that it's not their lives. It's something else. So we can see those areas there as he lays them out in page 170 as well. That our victory, that God's army submits to death, and our victory comes through defeat, like you were saying before. And so we overcome by loving Christ more than the earthly.
Because look at Christ. I mean, he's the ultimate example of victory coming through death. Mm-hmm.
It is. So the paradox for Christians is to conquer. To conquer is to be conquered. Which is interesting because, even Paul writes that they are in a procession before the Romans. So that the idea is they are the conquered ones. Romans would bring in their conquered people and bring them like a parade. And he's saying, this is who we are as believers. This is how we conquer. So that was the first part, is we conquer through witnessing. And that witnessing is witnessing one who has already won. And we're just explaining that even to the point of death. If you read church history, many people, and even modern day, many people claim Christ to the point of death. Mm-hmm. Because that is the ultimate end. Not this agenda or that agenda. The ultimate end is Christ himself, and he's already won. Mm-hmm. What happens on our American borders, whether they stay open or they stay closed, it's not going to affect the winning of Christ. He's already won. And so I understand, it's a serious issue. I get that. It's not what I mean, but
Right.
but it's that idea of which level are you witnessing most about,
Mm-hmm.
and that's important. The second way that we conquer is by not worshiping. Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting. So he uses a lot of the book of Revelation. Revelation is surrounded by the idea of worship. Mm-hmm. The elders are worshiping, the angels are worshiping, everyone's praising. You can find it over and over and over again. And every generation we are tempted to worship as well. But the battle that happens, it's actually the sermon we'll be coming upon, by the time this is out of the sermon we've already had, is this battle between the church and evil. And it's really a battle between who you worship. Mm-hmm. The church worships Christ the King, and the evil worships the Antichrist, the false Christ, the other things that are out there. And by not worshiping the world, whether it's good political agendas or other agendas, by not worshiping the world, that's how you conquer. Mm-hmm. And we're tempted to.
That's easy.
It's easy. I mean, that's why social media influencers work. It's really easy, and everyone wants to do it. And then I know people tell me that there are kids that are starting their little channels, and they're hoping someday to have 1 million followers. And they are now worshiping the idea that they can influence other people for their own games or their own things, but not for Christ.
Their own ideas.
Yeah. And we utilize the platform. I mean, we're here on YouTube as it is.
Right.
And we utilize those platforms. So the idea that it's surrounded around worship is something we have to think about. On page 173, he says, every generation we're tempted to give the loyalty due only to the city of God, to the city of man. The temptation is illustrated in many stories of the first centuries of the church, and you kind of see this in different ways. And he lays out some of the things that happened. The story of Perpetua. Did you read that story?
I did.
I'll leave that for everybody. It is quite a story of someone.
It's humbling,
who was martyred and was even begged to falsify her claim of something other than God, because one, she was a woman that wouldn't have been as common, and two, she was recently had given birth, and that she's a mother, and everyone was just horrified that they were going to martyr her, and she would not give up Christ. That was her. She would not worship anything else
than anything. Yep.
Yeah, and it even shows and her death was not a quick death.
No.
And so it's very powerful. It says this story shows us that we conquer by not worshiping the state. Every governmental system is animated by what's called the dragon, the worship of someone else. So I wrote next to it, I said, this is our dragon. The rest of his paragraph says, they demand too much loyalty from Christians. And I think of right now, if I were to flip on the news, who demands loyalty from Christians in our political system? It's mostly the Republican Party. I'm not saying who's good or evil, but I read that sentence and I go, oh, that's the Republican Party. It says each party solicits this allegiance. They ask for unwavering acceptance despite their evident corruption. Both sides. Mm-hmm. I think that's very true.
Absolutely.
Left or right. They want us to be everything they are for and against everything they are against. It's an all or nothing game right now. And I think it's very much so right now. But we are for another kingdom. And so our dragon, that's what I wrote on the side, this is our dragon. Mm-hmm. Are we worshiping our national American politics, whichever side you're on? Are you worshiping that to the sense that you're all in for one side or the other? They you got to do this. You may not like this Republican candidate, but you like some of the things they did. No, you're not allowed to do that. You may not like that Democratic party, but this Democratic candidate has done some good things. Oh, no, you can't do that. You're all in. You're either for us or you're not. Really, who's in charge here? The kingdom that we're here is not the American kingdom. And that's a hard mindset for people to get around. Mm-hmm.
Well, for one thing, it's easier just to say it's all or nothing. Mm-hmm. There's no gray area then.
There is, yeah, it's true.
So it's easier.
Yes. But we've said, and I've said it over and over again, we live in tension. Yeah. And I think we operate in a lot of gray. Mm-hmm. It's really mushy where we are. What's not mushy is who's king.
Hallelujah.
And who's there. But we are placed in that mush for this time.
Yeah.
And so we conquer we conquer by witnessing. We conquer by not worshiping Babylon, for lack of another word,
Sure.
the other as something other than Christ, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
We also conquer by waiting.
Oh, everybody's favorite.
It's our favorite. We love to wait. It says, what does it mean to wait? And sometimes, he says, sometimes in Christian circle, this means playing the bingo end times prophecy game. We're waiting for this, we're waiting for that.
Oh, there's that one.
Yes.
Okay, we tick them off.
Yeah.
We've seen this, we've seen this.
And so, and people believe we're at the end times. And they'll even write about what's going on in politics right now and claim that these are the parts of the end time. He actually has a letter to the editor of The Independent in August 2020. It says, and the letter to the editor says, "Wake up, America. Bible prophecy is being fulfilled before our eyes. Whether you like President Trump or not, he has already fulfilled one of the last prophecies in the Bible prior to Jesus' return, moving the U.S. Embassy back in Israel, back to Jerusalem, and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is one of the prophecies that must be fulfilled. No other president in history has done this, but Donald Trump did. We haven't seen nothing yet. What the world is expecting right now is just the tip of the iceberg." And then Patrick writes this, "To be clear, this is not what the Bible means by waiting." It's not you wait and see, we're waiting this. In Bible prophecy, visions are intended to encourage, and here is, watch out, people, this is going on, this is happening here. And I remember people saying similar things like this in Bush's presidency, in Clinton's presidency, in the Reagan years, in the Cold War years. And sometimes, I'm sure people were claiming the Antichrist was there
In McCarthy.
or in Hitler, or I remember in Gorbachev, that was another one, And so they're always trying to claim that instead of our waiting is different. It's like, watch out, we're here now. That's why I like the end times bingo game. Where,
right.
Who's the Antichrist? Who's this? This is happening here. It tells us to wait, but the Bible, when it says that our waiting is not inactive. It's a holy and hopeful waiting, which I think is different than what we read here. In Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, he argues that waiting means holiness and hope, and God's people need to become a distinct people of light in the light of Christ's return. We are different because no matter what chaos is happening today, I see the future as different. And I have hope for the future, as dim as it may look right now.
Right. We've read the end of the book.
Yeah.
We know who wins.
Yeah.
However.
And so Paul applies it to three things: sexuality, citizenship, and the church. And he applies it. He commands us to be separate from sexual immorality. And in his day, maybe there might have been some differences, but the idea of sexual immorality was very rampant. And the idea of women just being objects was very much a part of his society. And so, the church was to be different. Sex was to be seen, Patrick writes here, sex was to be seen as a good gift. It still should be seen that way, but it can be corrupted, like everything else. And so he's calling the church to wait on these things, to not be like the rest of the world. Our sexual habits, our sexual way of life should be different. It should look different. It should sound different than the rest of the world. And so Paul says that this waiting can consist also, the sexual part, but also consist of good citizenship. And he says we are to live quietly and mind our own business and work. That's from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 9 through 12. That he says our heavenly citizens fly under the radar. He wants us to be normal Joes and Janes, in some sense, who go to work, come home to family, serve the city, and love our neighbors. The loud and subversive reality of Jesus' return is paired with the quiet and submissive life. The way we live our life is different. So Paul concludes by instructing the Christians, so we are sexually waiting in a different way. We are citizens in a different way in waiting. And then he says the Christians are all about the church. Rather than pushing away from God's people, we are to press into community. And I think even more so as we're coming out of a pandemic, And there's a lot of just being online, and I can worship on my own from over here. The idea of community is important. Jesus' return compels faithfulness to other Christians. That's where we gather together. I like the political rally point. That's where we come together and work on that. And so maybe the most political, vigorous action someone can take is to be a faithful citizen, an employee, a faithful employee, a good neighbor, and a faithful church. He says church member, but I would be like church participant. I like that a little better than member, because maybe just being around churches so long, how many members you have versus how many people actually participate can be a vastly different number.
Sure.
But a good church participant, are you involved in your church in groups that are challenging each other in God's Word? Are you coming to church with the idea of what am I getting out of it, or with the idea of how am I here to serve and to grow? What are you doing there? He says we can be political activists in all of this. You can put a sign for whoever you're voting for in your front yard. It doesn't say not to do that. You can be political activists. Someone asks your view on the border, you can share it politely. You can have that, but it's not the only way to be political. The way we live our life is different, and we do that in the waiting. In this in-between time, we wait with hope. This is why I can be sexually different than the world. I have hope, so I'm okay to be in a monogamous relationship with my wife. And that is very clear. I have hope, so
it's the witnessing part.
It's the and it kind of brings that waiting and witnessing together. In where I am, and I can do that. So Paul tells us that we are to conquer in this time of waiting, which all this conquering in ways that don't seem like conquering ways.
Right.
We conquer by a proper witness. We conquer by not worshiping what else is out there, and we conquer by waiting. Our call is to witness to the kings of earth about the sacrifice of the Lamb. And that's a harder thing to do. I think it is, because the whole world around you is loud about other things. The New Testament says we are to have this victory, but it defines victory in this surprising new way. Victory through martyrdom, victory through death. We recognize Jesus came to install a kingdom, but it will be in his time and in his way.
Right, and that's actual death, but also death to self.
Yes, and that's what the symbolism of baptism is, that we die to self and we rise to Christ. We're being transformed into his image every day. And, that's why even Paul says, that we're not to be conformed by this world. We're to be renewing, constantly moving our minds to Christ. It is an active waiting. Our waiting activeness is about becoming more like Christ. So he says we will look at this in the next chapter and explore some different political postures that we see from scriptures to learn how we can step forward in faithfulness. So now we've seen all these different balances, all these different tensions. We must be politically as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. And so chapter 9 is going to talk a little bit about that. But here we conquer in the witnessing. We conquer in not worshiping. We conquer in the waiting. And so, as much as I don't like to wait, I'm an impatient person. I think it's good. So maybe we can practice waiting this week and see where we go.
And waiting patiently.
Oh, don't say that.
As opposed to waiting like you've got a burr under your saddle or something. Yeah,
waiting like I used to as a kid in line. Like, come on. Let's go. That's how I like to wait.
What's taking so long?
What's taking so long? That's the way I wait in a traffic jam. Kind of cut this link and cut over here.
Oh no, you're not one of those.
I am. When I just want to figure out how to get there the fastest, and it is definitely something I don't like to do. But as a whole, practice that this week. Sit in your waiting, and see if you're waiting well.
And encourage each other to wait too.
Yeah.
Because that's the beauty of community.
That is. We wait together, and you can encourage another believer who votes differently than you. Why? Because you have the same King.
That's right.
And we are waiting his full return, and that's what we're working towards. So,
amen.
Between this week and next, wait well.
Take care.